welcome to our first conversation at ANH. How long have you been with us now?
It's been a month now. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah. So Para has a law degree. She's worked in the Scottish police force. She has a passion for essentially justice as one of your greatest passions, as well as a huge passion for natural health. And Para has been working around the clock on an entirely new program that we have within ANH, which is reimagining, reframing ethics around health. One of the things we all know, if we're interested in buying ethical foods, most of us have an idea of where we're going to go. We can even have ethical holidays. We can put our money in ethical bank accounts. But when it comes to healthcare, it is much harder to find ethical healthcare. And to some extent, what we've seen in the last 3 years is this extraordinary shift in an approach centrally what's happened is ethics are being cast aside. A whole bunch of elements of medical ethics that have been around actually for millennia have just not been applied because essentially as the unaccountable stakeholder-led, not country-led, World Health Organization has taken ever more power, this extension of powers that is extending still further with the development of the pandemic treaty, the international health regulations. We really have to look hard at a kind of moral compass that ensures that, health services, health providers are working in the public interest, not in the interest of an elite or a group of stakeholders, which is really how things have been. So the starting point for that really has been to build a framework. Para, tell us about this framework that we've been building.
So yeah, we've been looking at building this framework for ethics that doesn't include just the therapeutic relationship between a practitioner and client or doctors and patients, but also includes the ethics related to health practitioners in general in their own lives and in practice, the communication concerning the health practitioners and doctors and therapists. We've also been including public health, which is really important, product-related communication, which is all to do with labeling, science and medical communication, human trials and clinical trials, animal studies, and synthetic biology and genetic modification, which again is a huge area which is increasingly more and more important to look at.
Absolutely. And today, of course, the central piece that we're going to be releasing is about the therapeutic relationship, the interaction between a patient, a client, and a health professional, which is something that has also been cast to the wind in the last 3 years when a lot of medical doctors in particular have not necessarily been able to provide the interventions that they believe are going to do the maximum good and the least harm. They've had to do what institutions sitting over their shoulder are telling them in order that they keep their license. Now, that is an ethical question, and we don't address ethics. I think of it a little bit like a stool with 3 legs, and we have the science that tells us how we're going to measure risk and benefit. We have the law that ensures that justice is being done, but both those legs on this very fragile, unstable stool are giving out. But we have another leg that we haven't been really giving much attention, and that's ethics. And maybe this one leg we can use to support the stool while we busy ourselves trying to fix the scientific and legal side. And many of us believe that strategic legal actions are going to be required with courts that are not subsumed by this sort of misrepresentation of facts that is all around us. So yes, ethics, this moral compass becomes critical. So we're going to look at the therapeutic relationship. Is it worth just flipping back and looking at any parts of the framework before we do that?
Yes, I think of course, all of the parts of the frameworks are really important, and that's why we are developing this, including all of them. But I think, Rob, you have particularly been working really hard for so many years on the public health side of things, and even the synthetic biology. I know this is, with your science background, a really important area to look at. Would you like to give us some examples?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reason why we have to address public health at the moment is because we are probably by May 2024, the pandemic treaty goes along with the amendments in the international health regulations. We're going to see a situation where the extension of powers given to this unaccountable body, the World Health Organization, that is now no longer funded by governments. It's interesting, if you go to the website and you look at how WHO is supported, you see all this list of countries. Most people still think it is the countries that are funding the WHO. Actually, what you'll find is that 80% of the money comes from individual stakeholders, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation being at the head of the list. So yes, Germany as a country funds a little bit more. Then you have the UK in the third state. Then you have Gavi. So if you add Gavi, which represents the vaccine companies, together with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you can see that vaccines are high on the list. Now, because of the powers that they're handed, they are going to be able to determine which interventions are given to the public. So when they roll out this One Health concept that is already being explored by NIH and the CDC in the United States, so that you can create a one-size-fits-all approach, it drives a coach and horses through self-determination. And if you look at when the UN actually set itself up in 1948, it was all about self-determination. It was always about doing the best for the public. It was acting in the public interest. It had largely democratic countries that were supporting it, no longer. So it's now stakeholder controlled. In fact, you'll see an area on the WHO website that's all about an invitation to stakeholders to invest in the WHO to get a return on investment. And they're suggesting for every dollar invested, $35 comes back. So what a wonderful thing to invest in, which is exactly what Bill Gates is doing. So we really have to look at this top-down model that is, essentially designed to fail. And then on the synthetic biology front, there's a very close link between the development of genetic platforms, particularly the mRNA platform that we've seen rolled out with COVID. They're now using that supposed success, which in itself is very, very dubious. How do you measure success? Do you measure by the number of lives that were saved? Well, there's a huge controversy over how many lives were saved. There's also massive controversy in terms of the number of people that have been harmed. And it didn't do the very thing that it set out to do, which is stop transmission. But nevertheless, they are arguing that this incredible success means that they can now roll out the platform for a bunch of other infectious diseases and also all sorts of other conditions. And Moderna are now talking about the use of mRNA for, actually they were working on cancer before COVID, but they're looking at for heart disease and a bunch of other major burdens on the healthcare system. So it's now seen as the magic bullet, and it really takes us away from the biochemical model of the pharmaceutical industry into a genomic model where you essentially provide synthetic instructions to the human body and get it to make whatever protein you want it to make, to do whatever you want it to do in the body. Now, have we had a public discussion on that? We absolutely haven't. So these are some of the reasons why we've got to look much more broadly, and obviously, looking at clinical trials and human studies and animal studies is part of it, which is why the framework includes all of these things. So Parrot, let's dig into the therapeutic relationship. Now, can you perhaps bring it to life by giving us an example of the kind of reasons why having a kind of reframing on what the therapeutic relationship is about through an ethical lens is so important.
Yes, I think we are seeing more and more I mean, we have seen a lot of stories in the media and especially with COVID, but not just related to COVID, just related to medicine in general, of people that have been harmed by negligence, harmed by not being provided with the proper information. I have been reading about a story of a young boy called Jack Hearn, who's unfortunately died from after taking the COVID jab. And he was provided the wrong information. The informed consent couldn't really be that informed if the information he was provided wasn't the right one.
He was told it was safe and effective, no doubt, like everyone else.
Yes, he was told different statistics by mistake that were older and not updated as well. And the medical board did recognize that, oh yeah, we've given him the wrong statistics. And a life has been lost. He was young. He wanted to have children. He wanted to. He was recently graduated. He had a life waiting for him, and just because of one vaccine, a few days later, after a headache, he just passed away, which is really tragic. But there are so many stories in the media, and this really shows how ethics have just been degraded really over the years, and we need to unearth the ethical principles and bring them back into...
Absolutely. I mean, it's shocking when you listen to these stories and you realize that for every story that has been reported, either in the mainstream news, as Jack's case was, but then there are hundreds of thousands that have been reported only in the alternative news, and then there are going to be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of others that are completely unreported. And if you look at the cascade of effects on the families involved, when so few of them can seek any kind of redress, that is surely an ethical question. So take us through some of the main principles that would, had they been central to the decision making by public health authorities, by the doctors, by the vaccinators involved, Jack and others wouldn't have lost their lives. How do we deal with this? What are the basic principles we need to look out for?
So most of the ethical codes are built on these four principles that were developed by Beauchamp and Childress in the 1980s, and the principles were autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So they are just very basic, and you can see them in all sorts of ethical codes and legislations.
Can you talk us through each one of them and just give us a handle on what they're about?
Of course. So autonomy means our right to make decisions for ourselves, our self-determination. Beneficence means that there's a duty by doctors and practitioners to so it's a positive duty of doing good for others and providing good for others. And non-maleficence is a negative duty or abstaining from doing harm and looking at the risks involved in any procedures and minimizing that risk. And justice just means our ability to take a case through the courts to find remedies, it also concerns the way we distribute health to people and make it affordable to everyone. So you can see how this is involved in a lot of ethical codes, but they are not being followed nowadays, as you can see in Jack's case.
Yes, I mean, had those four principles been upheld, Jack wouldn't have died. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
And countless others. So these are four well understood principles. They're not. Are there any other principles that we should take note of? Because I know one of the things that you've really been looking into is going back through the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and then even into the ancient Vedic texts and Chinese medicine texts. What have you discovered there? Are there some morsels of wisdom that we can take into the contemporary age?
Yeah, there's a lot to be taken from the ancients that have been lost over the years. And I think it's really important to realize that the four principles are just not enough to build a framework. There's a lot missing if we just apply the four principles. And I was really enjoyed reading about the Ayurvedic ethics. They have a lot of principles that you don't find anymore, such as our connection with nature and with a higher source, and the idea of love that's really not being found. I mean, we have the beneficence, but I think that sounds more formalized than saying love for others.
Well, of course, the term love is now the subject of scientific research, and we know that it gets called unconditional positive regard. But also this idea of compassion and empathy, which are actually two separate parts. We've wrapped that up into looking at wider resilience, but they are somewhat missing in the therapeutic relationship as well. And what about dignity and respect, which are built into all the major international charters on human rights? These are surely important values.
Yeah, again, you hear of them and everyone speaks of them all the time, but they're not really applied. And I think what's also missing is an understanding of that as individuals, we are connected to a whole, we are connected to the universe, we are connected to nature. And we can see more and more, I think science is now catching up on this idea as well, on how so many of our illnesses and diseases are stemming from our disconnection with nature. And I think this is why the ancient ethics knew that, and you can see it in their encouraging people to be connected with nature. So it's
What about the right to self-determination, which was built into the original Charter of the United Nations and the World Health Organization? Is there a change there? Because even if you look at the 4 principles of Beauchamp and Childress, you can consider that to some degree they could be part of a paternalistic model in which the practitioner, the doctor, is explaining with consideration of input of that individual and understanding the risks and the benefits and trying to do good. But what about where that right for self-determination, the ability of the individual to exert free choice? How does that compare when you look at Beauchamp and Childress as a sort of modern version of it versus what the ancients were talking about?
I think we've moved a lot from the idea, from the approach in the ancients, which was a lot more paternalistic. I think in the past, people would, in Ayurveda, for example, the doctor was seen as almost as God, and whatever the doctor would say, the patient wouldn't even inquire or want to know. If the doctor said something, that was it. And I think we've moved now a lot, which is important to balance this and not take everything from the ancients. And I think we need to look at the modern world, and ethics are something that needs to change depending on the world we live in, really. So I think now it's important that we do have the self-determination, but I think it should be a balance between that. I think the doctors should be acting as guides and providing the right information so we can make a decision. And I think there is a lot of emphasis on autonomy, and this takes away from the responsibility of doctors to provide us with the right information and guidance, because at the end of the day, they have the wisdom and the knowledge and the degree behind to know about an intervention that we don't have that background. So it's important that they provide this guidance to allow us to make a decision. So it's really a relationship between us and practitioners and clients.
So maybe that over the last 3 years, what we've seen, if anything, is actually a move back to a more paternalistic model from a more progressive model in which autonomy and self-determination was being considered. And then if we're going to have these public health crises, hey, they want to have a few puppet masters controlling it. So fantastic to have an introduction to it. There's going to be a detailed article to go along with this. So it's been amazing to have this teaser of the first compartment of this framework that we're going to be releasing in the coming weeks and months. And perhaps you can just finish off with maybe an element of the wisdom. You've been working so hard for the last month in this area. What comes out that can perhaps summarize where we're at with all of this?
It's been amazing to work on this project, and yeah, we have a lot more to of reading to do and research and writing, and it's a subject that I really love. But I think one element that I really stuck with me from the reading I've done is the Upanishads, the idea in the Upanishads of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the whole world is my family, and it's just such a beautiful principle to keep in mind when looking at ethics.
Absolutely. I mean, it could to some people sound a bit like the World Health Organization. I'm sure they have the same view, but ultimately, the ethics, the objective is very, very different. WHO appears to be acting in the interest of stakeholders, and these, views that are contained within the Upanishads are really about truly doing good for people in the public interest. So fantastic to have you here, and there's going to be plenty more coming. Don't forget to read the article that Per and I have written around the therapeutic relationship. Thanks so much.